BigDubz here. Today I wanted to show y'all something I've been asked a bunch recently, and that is how to put something into BeamNG Drive as a model. Whether it be, downloaded model or your own model that you've made. I've been asked a bunch of times. I made a similar video to this before, but it was really sped up and just had music behind it. So hopefully this will explain it a little bit more. Currently I am going to use two tools so far. Well, three, I guess. And that is Chrome to go find a model. And I am going to use Blender to set that model up. And I'm using Blender 3.6 right now, which I think is the current version of Blender. It's free, open source software for modeling and things. Highly recommend it. So if you don't have that, you'll need that. And of course you'll need BeamNG Drive. So let's get started. Hopefully this won't take me too long to do. And I can find a model nonetheless. Typically I like to go to Sketchfab. That's a great open source place to find models, I feel like. When you go to Sketchfab, you'll get a bunch of this stuff. But you can just search. When you click on the search bar, it kind of like switches modes, like lets you look for models. But maybe we can find something easy, like a container or something. Alright, yeah. So I'm seeing a couple of containers here, like this 20-foot container or something. There's a couple of download ones. Sketchfab is really awesome for this aspect right here. I like this one that's got some like rusty graffiti on the back of it. Looks pretty cool. So I'm going to go ahead and download this one, I think. So it's got some cool like graffiti on the back, some rust. It's pretty tore up. But anyway, Sketchfab is great for this. You can literally search, like if you see it over here on my side, you can search tons of stuff. And they have all kinds of cool, nifty things here. But let's see here. They come in all kind of model formats. I'm not picky. Blender can read a lot of stuff, so if you can't, there's probably a plug-in for it. It can read max files, I think, even. Well, no, it can't read max files. One thing that it can't read. Sorry. Wrong there. But yeah, sure, this DAE is fine. That's going to take a hot minute to download, it looks like. Check out this barrel while I'm at it. Also, typically, what I try to look for is a single texture set. If something's got a bunch of textures, it makes it confusing to do. For example, like this building. And maybe it's not, but sometimes what I run into is like a lot of these textures, like all this floor and like this wall will be like separate materials. And the more complex the model is, the more textures she'll have. Because you got to backtrack people's building of the model. So it's kind of complex whenever you start getting into like crazy models like buildings and stuff. Like this thing. it's probably got a bunch of textures, I guarantee you. You know, it's probably got one for the floor, it's probably got one for like trash, and it's got like textures for these clothes, you know, material files and everything. There's a bunch of material in here. So that makes it kind of hard if you're downloading models. If you make your own model and you texture it yourself, you know, obviously you know all the textures that you're using and everything. It makes it a lot more simplistic. But 9 times out of 10, most people don't know how to model yet, so they come to this as a way just to go and like download models and bring them in. Another thing to note is these models can be very high poly sometimes. Like this one's 113k polys. That's not good for Beam. Beam likes lower poly things, items. And if you don't set up loads are called, I guess, load of distance or something like that. I don't know. Meaning that the further I get from an object, the less detail I need to see. Like out here, I don't need to see hardly any detail because, you know, I need to vaguely see a barn because there's no point in rendering full detail at all times. Meaning that the amount of polys that the model has needs to be substantially lowered each time the camera moves away from that model, like this. So here you would want a 113,000 poly model, but way out here you want like a 2,000 poly model. To do that, you have to decimate models and stuff like that. That can be a little tedious. So just some tips there while I was waiting on that file to download. I believe it did download. Yeah, rusty container. Alright, cool. I typically move these out here. Actually, let me double check this file. Let's see what all we got. Yeah, see, this is what I'm talking about. So we got a bunch of pictures or images here, basically, just showing, you know, seems to be a door, metal, normal. Alright, yeah. So this is not the best example, but it is an example of showing you what I mean by having multiple textures for a model. See, it has all these textures assigned to this model, which is fine. It's not a big deal. So I was looking at that barrel. Let's go for it. One of these will have a single texture. Yeah, it's just right on the mark. Let's try this one. So FBX on this one. Hopefully it doesn't take forever to download. Alright guys, I'm going to pause real quick for this. So you don't have to watch this download. Okay. And it is downloaded now, I believe, as well. Yes. And let's do the same thing. I'm going to cut it, throw it out on my desktop, check it out real quick. So I can get it out of my downloads folder. Go ahead and delete this other container. All that other junk that's in there. Probably clean up my PC. Alright. Let's see what this one looks like. And this is part of the fun. It's hunting through these so I think this one actually just has one. Yeah, that's the AO map. It's got a base color. Perfect. Yeah. Got a height map. Metallic. I got a normal map. Oh. Alright, cool. Sweet. You could use all these, but Beam really only needs a normal map and a base color map. So, and they're in PNG format, so this model works perfectly for what I was talking about. Like I said, the more time you want to spend on getting a model in game, the more you'll figure out texturing. But I don't have a ton of time to do that, so I can go ahead and extract this guy and delete this one. And thanks to Simon, Mr. Simon, your asset is very well thanks. Cut. I typically try to make my own stuff if I can, but we're not all overly experienced modelers out there, so you know, it is what it is. Next thing I do after downloading a model is I have an actual hard drive that I work from for Beam. So I'll go ahead and put it on my Beam hard drive. And then I have a bunch of different folders and stuff where I store models, just different model things. However you want to do this is on you. Like this props area, I kind of got some things here. I always make like a downloaded folder and I make a working folder. So the downloaded is where I actually throw that actual item. So this barrel, and there's all its textures, and let's go ahead and unzip this here. And you'll get the same thing typically with Sketchfab. You'll get textures like doubled in the actual model for some reason. I don't know why. But here's our FBX. Here's all our textures. Alright, cool. Take note of this folder so that you can find it in Blender. So, if you wanted to copy that file path, you can. I just navigate two things in Blender. Typically when you start Blender, most people don't have an empty scene. You'll have like that cube in like the light stuff. I deleted all mine, and then I went to File, and then I went to Defaults and Save Startup File. So if you just select all that stuff, and then just hit delete on the keyboard, it literally will show you basically, it'll delete everything. Then you can just go, like I said, default save startup file. So I'm going to pause real quick again because I'm going to turn on show keys for Blender, and then we'll pick up again right quick. Sorry about that. Okay, we're back. Now you should see over here in the bottom right corner my mouse clicks. So, and whatever else I do on the keyboard. So, moving forward. Next, you're going to import an FBX because that's what type of file it was. If it was something else, you'd pick out whatever type of model it was, if it was DAE, STL, PLY, whatever. There's multiple model formats. And once again, we're going to navigate to that folder, like I said. I stored mine in a folder called props. I thought I did. There it is. Downloaded this barrel. Go source barrel. Alright. And voila. Barrel. Okay. First thing I noticed is it's off-centered. The center of this little thing right here is the center of the world for a 3D model in Beam, by the way. So if you put something below this line, like it is right now, this barrel will spawn halfway into the ground. If you put it above here, it will spawn above the ground. Vice versa in many other games. So if I'm not 100% sure on that, don't quote me. That's just typically what I like to think is the factor for most things. Usually I don't have any issues when I do things this way. So, but I noticed the origin of this model is definitely not in the center of that model. It's just out over here, like to whatever this thing is for some reason. I don't know. Probably when the person was modeling it, they were last messing with it over here, and that's where the origin sets. But anyway, to fix that, just go set origin, origin in the center of the surface. That will set the center of the origin to the center of this barrel. I will then move this barrel over on the X scale. Oh, never mind, I'm not going to move it that way. I'll just move it this way. And I want to try to line this up dead center, and I'm going to put it right above the ground. Alright. Now, does not look centered this way, so we're going to go ahead and center it this way. Alright, and that looks good. Okay, the next thing that I like to do is give this thing a reset. And to do that, we'll do an apply all transforms. What this does is all the scaling, moving, rotations, anything that I did to this thing, and including the origin that I set to the center of this, will now be snapped back to this 3D cursor. Any of the movement that I did, like all these things, will now be set to 1. All this rotation and everything should basically go back to, well, it goes to 0 because I zeroed it out. So, and your scale should be 1 for everything. So, and that gets your model pretty much centered up in line for view. Next thing we need to do is we need to rename it to something that's friendly to Beam, that doesn't also collide with the devs things. So typically I will put a short letter version of my name in front of a model so that I can easily find or identify that's my model. Plus I have these folders inside of Beam as well. So you'll see what I'm talking about as we get there. But name it something that you like to name it and you can keep track of. So I'm just going to call this, you know, DBZ for Dubz, and we're going to do barrel. Now, this is kind of important. To set up loads, we're going to, because this model is 3,000 polys, I'll go ahead and explain loads real quick before we get into them, because that will be another process here in a minute. Loads, like I said, was the basically the distance at which you render models. This model is 3,000 polys. Here, let's go ahead and name this barrel for now. And I'm going to just show you real quick here. If you'll turn on statistics by going up here in the top right corner, it's right by show overlays. There's a little drop down button. You can click on a bunch of different things. You can turn the grid off. You can turn the floor off, which is this grid thing down below. You can turn off the axis signs if you don't like them. I do, because they always help me kind of remember what I'm doing. But anyway, statistics. Alright, this tells me exactly how many polys this thing is. Polys are the triangles here, in between these cracks everywhere that you'll see. There's 3,000 of them that make up this model. That's sufficiently decent for a barrel. Now obviously like a full building's going to be like you know, higher polys, like the 113,000 like I was showing you. There's nothing wrong with that. You just got to set up the proper loads. Anything above 1,000 poly needs a load system, I feel like. Even if it's just a single load, dropping it from whatever it is to another one helps drastically in Beam. You can get away with no loads, but it's only on models that are 1,000 polys and below, I feel like. So if you're setting up anything else, typically try to set up a load. If not, then your PC will suffer. Go play my Alizan map. Some of the things on there doesn't have it, and it makes some lower end PCs really scream. So, alright, enough about loads. Back to the modeling process here. The next thing that we need to do is we need to check on the material name. I like to name the material the same thing that we got going here, because that'll play a part. Well, I don't want to delete the whole thing, and I'm gonna rename this right here. I usually name all three of these the same thing, and material file is down here. If there's another material, you can delete it by hitting this minus sign. You can just go up here to the top and you can hit minus and delete it. To assign another material, you would just click on the plus sign. It would make a new one. You would rename it whatever you want to name it up here or right here, and then this is actually assigning it to the model. This is just all the ones that you have or have created, but this is actually what assigns it to the model. So if you had another texture and you wanted to assign it to the model, you could pick another one here. Anyway, moving on. The next thing I like to do before I get this ready is create a collision model. Collision model is what you run into to like make this thing a solid object. So obviously this thing is full of liquid. It would be you know, hard, right? You'd run into it and it would obviously not move for some reason, or if it did move, it would, you know, put a real bad dent in your vehicle and then kind of slide away or something like that. Without going into a really long process about J-beams and how beam works, you know, these are static models that have collidable things. This could be applied to a rock or a house or something like that. That's static item, and you want to run into it, but it doesn't necessarily need to move or have the functionality of moving. Okay, so let's go ahead and add a mesh, and I'm going to add myself a cylinder. It's huge, no big deal. Scale this down a little bit. I'm not going to walk you through modeling. If you don't know how to model in Blender, you need to learn how to model. I also have mesh machine tools, so if some of my menus don't look the same as yours, sorry, but alright. And basically what I'm doing here is I'm creating a exact shape similar to this barrel here, so that the when you collide into this barrel, it's collidable. So there's another way inside a beam to do this without having to do these. This is the custom way to do a custom collidable mesh. You can also, there's an option in here that where you just use the barrel and you don't do a collidable mesh, you just use the object, which is probably your best instance most of the time. But I also wanted to represent this in a video so that you see how you can do a custom collidable mesh. And the purpose of it. If you had a rock like that was a lot sharper in places, you would want to do a custom collidable mesh or some kind of sharper objects or things like that. But typically just using the sufficient mesh, and there's a checkbox in Beam that says the actual mesh itself is collidable. That's the best way, but like I said, this would be for more detail and accuracy of a collidable mesh. But with this also comes the downside of things. So like if you were copying a rock to do this, you would need to really have a more lower poly collision mesh, but still the same like form as the rock. So doing that, you would need to create a custom collision mesh, but not an extreme amount of polys at the same time, if that makes sense. But here we're just creating a basic shape. And I just shaded it smooth. And what you call that is a Col Mesh -1 in Beam. If you want to take note of that, it's capital C, by the way. It has to be just like this. Now, if I was doing a rock, I could take this straight up barrel, and we would disregard this. For example, if I was doing a rock, what I typically do is, and also how I create a lot of my loads, is I'll copy this model and I'll paste the data blocks. Like I said, I already created a custom one up here, but that's okay. And this is where my naming that I was talking about comes into play. To do this, you need to name the auto loads at what the model will load at. And that is done by having an A after something. Underscore A and a number. Okay, so to me that can be confusing sometimes, because what happens to me is I want a series, a set of models. Like I had like 5 of these barrels, right? And I want to do A, B, C, D, and G, right? Barrels. They're all different barrels. You can't do the first barrel as your name underscore barrel A, because the game's going to get confused. It's going to start thinking about it's doing auto loads for stuff. So you have to not use A unless you're doing auto load. So my first barrel I typically do for like a series, I don't call it A, I just call it barrel. Now the next one I would call underscore B. Alright, so it would be your name underscore barrel underscore B. Okay, and then to do an auto load on a B, you would do your name barrel underscore B underscore A 500, right? Or A 50. Okay, so now then, back to the number scheme. So like I said, the A means to do load system after a name of a mesh. So to do this now, then I want to make this one, let's see, probably 20. I want to load this one. And this one now, I need to rename as A500. Alright, so this is the detailed model, and this is the non-detailed model. Actually, I'll change this to 800. So basically what this means in Beam is at 800 pixels away from this model, it will load this model, basically. So, and I like to take this name, and I like to rename everything, because what Blender likes to do is rename everything for you. And this is what I'm talking about on the materials a while ago. So I don't want this material anymore, so I'm going to erase it. And now I'm going to reassign it back to the original material that I wanted. Okay? And that is because now these two models will share the same texture, always. Alright. Now then, on this 820 barrel, what I like to do is I like to apply a decimate modifier. A decimate modifier in Blender, let's hide this one, will lower the poly count of a model. See? If you see, I can completely destroy the model. But what we're looking for is a lower poly count to the model so that that it switches away from, I'm probably going to stick right there about 1800 because it's starting to get some weirdness going to it. And what I'm doing here is so that I create a load system. So now this poly count will be, and we're just going to hit apply. So that applied that to that barrel. It will still keep the same textures. The same texture will still apply to this. This is what's great about Blender. It's non-destructive feature. So you can do this to rocks, different things like that. Now, if you start bringing it down an extreme amount, it will destroy the texture. You will have to go around, you'll have to fix your texture a little bit. But if you do it just a tiny amount, to a certain amount, it'll keep the texture typically intact just fine, but it can destroy it. So, Now we're typically set up for a 100% scene for Beam. Sorry. I like to apply all the transforms to everybody so that now they're all sitting down here. Once again. So just to go over what we did, we brought in our model, which is this model right here. We centered it to the scene, brought it above the scene. We first named it our first name, but I explained to you why I didn't call it _Abe if we were doing a series. We assigned it an auto load naming afterwards, so it's going to load this model. Inside of there, we also gave it a texture name, and we assigned it the actual texture name. If this was another model for a series, you'd just do _B after this, C, D, and so on. And we created a lower poly model after that by decimating a copied model that I just copied this model, and then I applied a decimate modifier to it, and we renamed it with a load system of 20 because it's a lower distance, because that's when 20 pixels away it'll load for you. So and then I gave it the same texture name because I want it to load the same texture as everything else. So and then we created before that we did create a collision mesh. This is not always necessary to do, but this is how you create a custom collision mesh. And I will show you where the feature is to do normal collisions on a normal model. So you could just technically skip the load system and theoretically just put a model straight in by just dropping the model in and making sure it's not overly high poly, and then doing the last part of this video's stuff to prep it. So the last part to get something ready to go into Beam is you have to add these things called empty plane axis. They're also a nice way for me to judge the size of something, I feel like. You see these little orange marks. That's typically the size of something in Beam. So like this model is like almost touching the top. That's a good size for a barrel, if that makes sense in real life. And if I was to add like a truck here, you would obviously want your truck to be way out here or way out here. If I was to add a building, you would want your model up here or something like that. So when I add an empty plane axis, that's typically one way for me to judge a size of something. If I need to scale it up or down, I can do that. But what you're going to name this is base 0, 0. That tells Beam to start considering this as model, and it's the start of your scene, and what is inside below the folder structure is considered model information. So you have to add another one of these to say that you want to start the scene. Start one. Alright. So, and then what you do is you hold down Shift and you left click and drag this into base. So now we have a scene process here. So it tells Blender to, hey, this is a model, this is the start of the scene, and this is what's inside that file. We do the same thing here as we just do, click on the top model, and if I had a bunch of these, I just usually hold down Shift and I click down here to select everything, and then I do another shift, and I hold down shift and I left click again, and I just drag that straight in to start. So now then, if I close base, you'll see that everything's closed up. But inside of all this scenery that I basically have this model. So, like I said, if you wanted to, you could just come in here and add these two features and add a single model, and then check collisions inside the game, and you would be good to go. So this is ready for export. Beam reads DAE, so you just go to export DAE. I'm going to navigate back to that folder, BeamMODS, and I did props. Alright, this is where I like to make a new folder that I work from, and I'm going to call this DBZ barrel. We'll just call this barrel A. And this is only for my reference usually. So barrel A. This also is a model that I'll use, so I know what the model is for me. Like I said, the reason why I didn't use this as a while ago in here is because of the load system that I explained a couple of times now. So right now this is just basically naming scheme for me. You can name this whatever you wanted. You can just call this your name barrel, whatever, right? Okay, cool. Nothing over here to select. Straight up export, and you're good to go. So the next thing I like to do, so I like to navigate out to that folder. Props. And I like to put the textures inside that folder. And all I said, like I said, is I need is the color, and I need a normal map typically for models in Beam. You don't need any of these other ones, although if you were rendering it, that would be fine. But typically I just use these. So, and then what I do is I go back to the folder where I put my DAE. I paste those textures in. And I like to rename them to something more appropriate to the model. A color. And we'll rename this as well. Barrel A normal. Alright. There we go. So, that is good to go for now. From here, you can copy this folder. This is my hard drive, right? You will need to copy this source folder over to Beam and create it into your map as a model. That can be found in the actual 0.30 folder. Some of you work out of mods and unpacked folder and level name right here. That's fine. I don't. I work out of the actual levels folder inside the actual Beam 30 folder. And then I use my actual name of my map because these are direct changes, so I don't have to copy over any of my changes and stuff every time to my mods folder. That's the reason why I do that. It's not very safe. Make sure and always back up. But this is just how I do my stuff. There's an art folder in your actual folder by now. You should know this. If you don't know this, something you should know if you're doing custom models. There's a shapes folder. So it's level, your name of your level, your art folder, and your shape folder, right? If you didn't have anything in here, you would make these folder. If you just had a shapes folder, you would just have nothing in here. So I would add a folder inside of here. I typically add like the folder that I was working with. I already have that folder in this map. It's called DBZ props. So if you didn't have any folders in your shapes folder, you would add that folder right now. You would add DBZ props. And then inside of that folder, I typically paste my model. Mine already has a couple items in here, but I'm adding this one to it. So I pasted it in there. And just to run through that again, that is in my art folder of my level, and it's under a folder called shapes. And then in here I put my name of my props and like assets that I make. I usually call them DBZ underscore whatever, category. This one happens to be props, so I put it under props and it's under barrel. So there is the actual folder, and there's those files. So we'll keep that one there for now. Next thing to do is open up Beam. Sorry this is so long. And I'm going to, I guess, download a update right now, it seems. Man, you gotta be kidding me. There we go. Alright. So I'm sure by now, if you've already created a custom level, you've already gotten this far, so you know where I'm talking about. I'm going. So I'm going to go into my map, obviously. Doesn't really matter what map you want to go into. You can go into grid map. Doesn't really matter. Because it's going to load your assets because it's your asset browser. So now to go on the grid map, no, it'll copy it all over, I think. Yeah, it doesn't really matter. The only thing that would matter is where you would go navigate to find that asset, typically. This is CO Trails, map I've been working on recently. You gotta load up your asset browser. If you don't have it loaded, you can find it by going to Window, Asset Browser. Let's go ahead and let this bad boy load up. Basically, I have a lot of assets in this level, so it's scanning all those. Kind of how the folder structure works is you navigate to your level. And you would find basically in the asset browser my level, my art folder, my shapes folder, and then I would look for my props folder, and voila, we have a barrel A. Now then, so like I said, it's going to come out white. That's because I haven't assigned any textures to it. But it does hover above the ground a little bit. If the ground was level, back here you can see it's level. But the spawn point of the actual little thing where you move it from is underneath where we set it at. So if I was to set it way down here, it would be way down there. So you'd be trying to move a model like way down there, but the bottom down there is accurate, so I feel like you can easily have it snap to the ground and things like that. So now then, what we got to do next is we need to assign it a material. If we go to the material editor, since I had this object selected already, if I was to click off this and I was to open up the material editor, it would not be on there. It would be off on something random. Well, I guess not. It shows the last known thing. So, but anyway, this is the material that we assigned it over here in Blender. Barrel. So, you can see barrel. They match. So, it is being linked right now. And it is putting a materials file inside of my my level. The reason why I don't copy the files from each level and have a material file in there is because you will have to erase those and add them back again. If not, if you know you're gonna have to deal with a lot of like caching issues and like trying to find the model texture and referencing other levels and stuff like that. So the easiest thing to do is only work with a new material each time. And like I said, this will open up the folder, and I'll just select the color. That gives it its texture, and then to give it its roughness or bumps and features, I'll open up the normal map on it. And we will save all those materials. Now, the cool thing about this is, in the shape editor, there is a, the asset browser, there's a shape editor, sorry. And if you right click on a model and you do shape editor, we can see the barrel here in Beam, and this is like the little render thing that it has. If we do force detail, you can see that when I get a certain distance, it will load this lower poly model, and you can see how it kind of sucks in and doesn't. And then at 2 it disappears. See? And that is taken care of by the load system that we set up. And you can see that it is 1,821 polys here, and it's 3,000 at its base level. And that is the load system that we had. The only other thing that we could check on right now is we could render our collision mesh as well on this model. And we see that our collision mesh is looking good. It's just this little circle, like I said, that we made, that we did. Now, if you had one that was more complex, like a rock or something, you would see a more complex collision mesh here. So that is it. That basically gives you a hard model. So if I run into this, it will smash my truck, and when I get really close to it, it gives me a real pretty barrel look. When I get away from it, you can see that it gets darker and it's lower polyed. And the further I get away from it, it'll remain at that lower poly model style. Until I get right up on it, and I get to see all this prettiness that it's got. I'll rotate it around, so and we'll go crash into it. You can see from out here it loads the black thing. Then we get to a certain point, loads our other details, and if if I'm not mistaken, we can run right into this if I could hit it. Ooh, yeah. Nice dent. Where I just crushed it. And that's how you put custom objects into Beam. Sorry it took so long. There's a lot to explain. It's not a too terribly complex thing. It can be. But once you get it, I can typically run through a model in like 20 minutes and put in it game. Just because there's like at least 20 minutes worth of me explaining everything. So, I hope you enjoyed. I hope this is helpful for you. And that's how you download a model from the internet, basically, as a free source, and you bring it into Beam and use it as an asset. Hopefully, like I said, this helps y'all out. You can go through it a couple of times, learn from it. Make sure and leave some feedback in the comments. I'll try to do some more of these things as I get a little bit better at Beam. Maybe, some truck related things and this and that. But anyway, thanks for watching. Have a good time. Peace. Have a good one, guys.